Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are going to try the next lesson in this series. This one is very similar to what we did last week, so hopefully it'll be super easy. The only difference this week is instead of using unit fractions, we're going to use some other fractions, but we're going to do the exact same thing. So you can be following along in Google Slides, or if you printed out the PDF, you can be using that. Or you can just follow along with what I'm doing, whatever works for you. There will be times when you need to pause the video. Please do make sure you pause the video and do the math and then come back. All right, let's get started. All right, so multiples of fractions. So essentially we need to figure out how we can write the product of a whole number and a fraction as a product of a whole number and a unit fraction. So kind of the same things we were doing. Again, remember multiples are those things when you are able to multiply a number by something to get that other number. So multiples of 2 are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc. All right, so we're starting with a real world example. This little girl looks like she baked something for us. So it says Jen is making 4 pans of baked ziti. For each pan, she needs 2/3 cup cheese. Her measuring cup can scoop 1/3 cup of cheese. How many scoops of cheese does she need for the 4 pans? All right, so there's a couple different things going on in there. So let's look at their example. It says use a model to write the product of 4 times 2/3 as the product of a whole number and a unit fraction. Remember from last week, a unit fraction is just a fraction that has 1 in the numerator. So she started off by thinking about how much 2/3 is compared to a whole. So we have 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and she has 2 of them. So 2/3 is 1/3 plus 1/3, which we know is 2 times 1/3. So that is exactly what we were doing last week, not anything different. All right, but now is where we get more challenging because she isn't just making 1 pan of ziti. She wants to make 4 pans of ziti. So it shows the example here that 1 pan was 2 times 1/3, which equaled our 2/3. So for 2 pans, we have this same amount, but now we have an extra times 2. So if I multiply my whole numbers first, I get 4 times 1/3, which is 4/3, just like last week. All right, so if we add another pan, so now instead of 2 times 2, we have 3 times 2. So 3 times 2 is 6, so 6 times 1/3 gives us 6/3. So we move down to our final one, the one we actually need. And so we can do 4 times 2, which is 8. 8 times 1/3 is 8/3. So they wrote it out for us here. It says 4 times 2/3 equals 4 times 2 times 1/3. Because if you remember, 2 times 1/3 was how much 1 pan was. We have 4 pans. And so we know that would equal 8 times 1/3, which equals 8/3. So how many third-size scoops of cheese does she need for her 4 pans? Well, if she needs 8/3 cups of cheese, that means she's going to need 8 scoops of cheese. All right, so it says Jen decides to make 10 pans of ziti. Describe a pattern you could use to find the number of scoops of cheese she would need. Well, if we go back and look at, for 1 pan, she needed 2/3. 2 pans was 4/3. 3 pans is up to 6/3. 4 was 8. So if we look at those numerators seem to have a pattern going. 2, 4, 6, 8. So what do you think the final pattern might be for how many scoops of cheese she would need to make 10 pans. Well, don't get caught up in, okay, so we have 2, 4, 6, 8, and get to 10 and be like, okay, that's it, I'm done. Because we know that 5 pans would require 10 scoops. 6 pans would require 12. 7 pans would require 14. 8 pans are up to 16. 9 would be 18. So 10 pans is going to be 20 scoops. Because if you remember, each one of those we multiplied by a 2. So if we take our 10 pans times 2, we'll get our total number of scoops. Hopefully that makes a decent amount of sense to you. All right, let's see what's on the next page. All right, multiples. Multiples. You have learned to write multiples of unit fractions. We did that last week. You can also write multiples of non-unit fractions. That's kind of what we're working on right now. So they give us a nice little number line. It says use a number line to write the multiples of 2/5. So they kind of pretty much did this one for us. And it shows that we have 1 times 2/5 got us to 2/5. Then 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Well, that's going to be an 8/5. 5 times is a 10/5. So the multiples of 2/5, again, essentially instead of having 1s on top, now we have 2s on top. So we just multiply those. We have 2/5, 4/5, 6/5, 8/5, and 10/5. All right, so now it wants us to write 6/5 as a product of a whole number and a unit fraction. So they did this multiplication of 3 times 2/5 to get 6/5, but now they want us to go back to what we did last week and write it as times a unit fraction. So they plotted it on their number line here. And then they went back and said, okay, 1 times a fifth, 2 times a fifth, 3 times a fifth, 4 times a fifth. And so we know if I have 6/5, that it's going to be 6 times 1/5. Well, that looks kind of familiar here. So 3 times 2/5 equals 6/5, which is the same as 6 times 1/5. And if you think about that, that 3 times 2 there looks an awful lot like that 6. So explain how to use repeated addition to write the multiple of a fraction as the product of a whole number in a unit fraction. Essentially, what they want you to do there is just to say, essentially what we just did here, that if we have 3 2/5, we know each 2/5, so each 2/5 we know is a 1/5 plus 1/5. And if I have a whole bunch of them, then I have a whole bunch more of 1/5 plus 1/5. I think you'll get the idea on that. I'm not going to harp on that too much. Let's go ahead down here and move to the share and show. I know there's a terrible glare going there. Hopefully I can make that go away here. We'll see how that works. So on these ones, this is one where after I explain it, I am going to ask you to pause the video, go ahead and jot down your answers, then come back and check them with what I did. So it says write 3 multiples of 3/8, and it gives you it in as an actual problem. It shows you it on a number line, and then it wants you to write those down. So I want you to go ahead, pause the video, go ahead, do those problems. And because some of you might be using the problems on the video, I'll slide that up a little bit so that you can still see the problem at hand here. So pause the video, do the math, then come back. So you're writing 3 multiples of 3/8. Okay, hopefully you did that. So now to write these three multiples, well, 1 times 3/8 we know is 3/8. That's an easy one. And then 2 times 3/8, if we follow along on our number line here, we see that that's going to be 6/8. And if we continue along, 3 times 3/8, that's going to be 9/8. So when I write them in here, I have 3/8, 6/8, and 9/8. And again, just like last week, please notice I'm not using those answer lines as my fraction bar. I'm writing my own fraction bar there. So make sure you do that. All right, so let's see what else you can show me. Marker transfers, lesson learned. Okay. All right, so here's some more of the share and show problems. So this time, it wants you to list the next 4 multiples of 3/5, also the next 4 multiples of 2/10, and then to write the product as the product of a whole number and a unit fraction. So rewriting it as the unit fraction. So again, go ahead, pause the video, do the math, then come back and check your answers. Okay, good job. Thanks for doing that. All right, let's see. List the next 4 multiples. So if I have 3/6, that was 1 times it. So 2 times would be 6/6. And then 9/6, 12/6, 15/6. All right, and over here, 2/10 goes 4/10, 6/10, 8/10, and 10/10. Hopefully you got those right. If not, again, remember, you're always welcome to post questions. Send me a message through Google Classroom, send me an email, have your parents send me a dojo. We'll get this figured out. All right, so write the product as the product of a whole number and a unit fraction. Okay, so 3 times 3/4. Well, I know 3/4 is really 3 times 1/4. And so I know I have another 3 out here. And if we even follow their diagram, they let us right out there to 9/4, which means I have 9 times 1/4. And I'm going to go ahead and use our parenthesis notation. Remember, a number squished up against something in parentheses is a multiplication problem. That way we don't get carried away with our x's there. All right, so the same thing over here. If we look at this, they were nice and they drew it out for us. They did one group of 4/6 and a second one. We, of course, know that 4/6 is 4 times 1/6. And this says we have 2 times 4 times 1/6. So that's 8 times 1/6. Also, keep in mind, remember, a dot is another way we show multiplication. So you can interchange those as much as you need to. Okay. On your own, list the next 4 multiples of the fraction, write the product, and then there's a question down here. Little son is a hot question. Are 6/10 and 6/30 multiples of 3/10? Explain. Okay, so if you have the capability, I would like you to post your answer on this on Flipgrid, and you can respond to each other on that and see what we think. I'm not going to tell you the correct answer for that. If you are unable to use Flipgrid, I will create a question as well, and you guys can have a text battle where you text your responses. I'll put here, or question. We may end up with 2 different debates going on, depending on Flipgrid. You'll be able to see the other class too. On the question, it'll only be your class. So we can kind of see where people go. Maybe I'll even make it a multiple choice thing and we can see where the votes come in and we can hash that out. In fact, I might even lean more towards doing that as a question. But if typing it out or you have a hard time explaining that way, you're always welcome to go ahead and post a video on Flipgrid. All right, so I'm going to ask you to pause the video once more. You're going to answer these questions. And again, I'll move this up in case you need to see them on the video here. I guess I might need to trim that. Okay, so again, you're going to pause the video. You're going to answer these questions. Then you can come back and check your answers. So again, pause the video, do the math, then come back. All right. Hopefully you did the work and you actually pause that video and you're not just going to watch me do all the work. Because remember, you can't learn unless you're the one doing the work. All right. So list the next four multiples of the fraction. All right. So we have 4/5. So next would be 8/5, 12/5, 16/5, 20/5. 2/4 would be 4/4, 6/4, 8/4, 10/4. Also keep in mind, just like in class, for this particular set of questions we're using, I don't have an answer key. So I'm doing the problems live with you. If I make a mistake, which is possible, please make sure you let me know so I can correct it so that other people aren't led astray. Hopefully my brain is functioning properly and I'm getting these right. All right, so 5/12. So then we have 10/12, 15/12, 20/12, 25/12, and over here we have 6/8, 9/8, 12/8, 15/8. All right, and these number lines are so helpful when they do them like this. So they already show me going out there, and it shows it going to 8/8. Well, I know that must mean it's 8 times 1/8. And on this one, it goes out to 9/5. So that means it's 9 times 1/5. And again, I'm not telling you the answer to that one right now. I want you to go on and answer the question. Put your opinion in there. If you would rather share it through a video, you can make a Flipgrid video. But so make sure you do that so that we can have a nice conversation about that this week. All right. Let's do some story problems because you know we always have to have some real world connection with this. So Josh is watering his plants. He gives each of 2 plants 3/5 pints of water. His watering can holds 1/5 of a pint. How many times will he fill his watering can to water both plants? All right. So what do you need to find? What's the first thing we have to figure out? What are they asking us? And so it's how many times he must fill his can. I'm going to leave out watering just because I don't have enough room. I'm also going to put in parentheses here to remember that he has 2 plants that he has to water, not just one. He has 2. So what information do we need to use? Okay, well, we need to use that one plant needs 3/5 pints. We need to know that there are 2 plants. And we need to know that the can holds 1/5 of a pint. So how can a drawing or a model help you solve this problem? Well, you might consider drawing, like maybe this is plant number 1 that I know takes 3/5. And here's my plant number 2 that I know also takes 3/5. And then I know that my can only hold 1/5. So I know this guy is going to need 3 pours to be full. To get my 3/5, I need a 3 times 1/5, which means this guy also is going to need 3 pours. So now I can see how many total pours I might need. All right, so it says show the steps. So one way is we could draw pictures. Another way would just be to do the math like we did on the previous page where we said, okay, I know that I have 2 plants that each need 3/5 of water. And I can break my 3/5 down so that I know I have 2 times 3 times 1/5. Because remember, 3 times 1/5 is how we got 3/5. And so now I know I need 6 times 1/5. And if 1/5 is the amount my watering can hold, then 6 is how many times I'll have to fill it. Hopefully that all kind of makes sense on that. All right, what is 5/12 written as a product of a whole number and a unit fraction? I'm not going to ask you to pause the video. I'll just wait for a couple of minutes. I'd like you to do 14 and 15 here. So 15 says, which is a multiple of 5/6? So those two problems, I will pause here for a moment and you can answer those and then I'll show you the correct answer. All right, so for number 14, this word here that's saying a unit fraction is important. Because remember when it's asking you about a unit fraction, that means you must have a 1 in the numerator. So 5/12, this is kind of review from last week, means we have 5 times 1/12. That's all I wanted you to do on that. So which is a multiple of 5/6? There's a couple of these that look like they could be. But remember, we increment using our numerator. So if I were going to write them out, I would have 5/6. My next one would be 10/6. Notice my denominator does not change. So I have 3 of them that have 10 as a numerator, but only letter D there has my 6 in the denominator. All right, my marker likes to bleed onto all my other pages here, but that's all right. All right, so next up would be the independent practice, but I do have this extra practice for lesson 2. If you're still a little confused and want to stick around for doing this, you can. Otherwise, you can go ahead to the lesson 8.2 practice. Again, just like last week, there is a front and a back. I think what I might do this week, though, instead of doing the Google form where you go through to check your answers, I might do this kind of how we did in the classroom where I'll make an answer sheet and I will just post it as an image and then you can just go in and check your answers. I think that might be a little easier and a little more straightforward. Um, Still debating on that because I'm making the video before I actually put stuff in Google Classroom. So don't hold me to that. Just make sure you read. I'll let you know whether there's a Google form to answer or just an answer sheet. If you have questions, obviously just ask. All right, so again, front and back of this to make sure you do that. There is one other thing that you will see posted this week. Believe it or not, this is the middle of the chapter already. There is a mid-chapter checkpoint. So this is in a kind of a review of all the things that we have done so far in the last 2 weeks. So you can go ahead and answer those. And then on the back, there are some multiple choice ones. I think for this one, I will probably just do the answer sheet, especially because I know putting some of those are tough with multiple answers. So you can check that. Again, it falls under those same ideas of you're only going to learn if you actually do the work. So just because I provide answers doesn't mean you can just copy them. That doesn't help you at all. All right, so those are the things you can look to see what you have in there. I am going to go over these last couple questions if anyone wants to stick around to make sure they understand. Otherwise, you are free to go work on your independent work. All right, so we're listing multiples of the fraction. Again, we have 3/10. So this is 1 times 3 to get 3/10. So then 2, we would have 6/10, 9/10, 12/10, 15/10. As you can see, the numerators are counting by threes. If I go over here to 7/12, you're going to find that we're going to count by sevens in our numerator and our denominator will stay the same. So I'll have 14/12, 21/12, 28/12, 35/12. Now, writing this as a product of a whole number and a unit fraction, if we didn't have the number line, this would be a little trickier. I'm going to do this one as if we didn't have this number line. I would have to take my 3/6 and write it as 3 times 1/6, just like we did last week. But I also have this extra 2 out here. So now I know I have 6 times 1/6, which is what it's looking for. And if you look at where their answer landed, they landed at 6/6, which we know from last week is 6 times 1/6. So I can come over here and do the same thing. 2/8 is really 2 times 1/8 times 3. So I have 6 times 1/8. And if I look at where that falls, it landed at 6/8, which is 6 times 1/8. Questions about that? Again, if you have questions, feel free. Email me, comment on Google Classroom, have your parents send me a dojo, and we will, I'll get those answered to you as best I can. Remember, just like in class, you're also welcome to call a buddy. If some of your friends are doing the same lesson, you are allowed to talk to them about it. You are allowed to, sort of work together distantly. So make sure you are checking everything in Google Classroom, and I will see you next week.